This video is on Chapter 11, the endocrine system. So the endocrine system and the nervous system are the two systems that control the body. They're responsible for homeostasis. Now, the nervous system does it through a series of nerves, like we've talked about, neurons, excitable cells, that signal other cells to do certain things. The endocrine system does the same sort of thing, except they use glands that secrete hormones, which are chemicals that go in the fluids of the body, go everywhere, and they target cells that have receptors to that hormone. Some hormones are very specific and very few cells are targeted. Others, most cells in the body are targeted, like thyroid hormone targets almost every cell in the body, whereas the follicle stimulating hormone only targets the follicles of the ovaries. Sometimes there are local hormones, they're paracrines or autocrines, but we're not going to talk about those. Exocrine and endocrine glands, we've already talked about it in the past. Really, the neurotransmitters of the nervous system are very much like local hormones. So they have actions on specific target cells, the cells that have the receptors to that. And they end up regulating metabolic processes within the cells and therefore the whole body. So these are just comparisons. So anatomically, the endocrine system is diffuse. There's glands all over the body. So they are not physically in contact with each other, they are chemically in contact with each other. The major endocrine glands, the glands that are primarily endocrine, and that's what they're for, are the Pituitary Gland, the Thyroid Gland, the Parathyroid Gland, the Adrenal Glands, the Pineal Gland, the Pancreas, the reproductive glands, which have an endocrine function and also other functions, kidneys, and the thymus. Again, the kidneys have other functions as well. Almost all other organs have cells that are that produce hormones. So like liver, heart, GI tract, and so there is enteroendocrine and there are heart endocrine components, but that's not their primary purpose. So this is a map of where you find them. Two fundamental types of hormones. There are the fat-soluble, which are the steroids. They derive from cholesterol. And the non-steroidal ones, which tend to be proteins. They're either amines, peptides, proteins, glycoproteins. They're something. So the steroids are nonpolar and can cross the cell membrane. The non-steroidals are water soluble and can't cross cell membranes. So steroids are things like estrogen, testosterone, aldosterone. They tend to say sterone in them. Cortisol, which is cortisone. Etc. So the steroids, lipid soluble. They pass through cell membranes. They have to be carried in the bloodstream by plasma proteins. The receptors for steroid hormones are found inside the cell, usually at the nucleus. The hormone binds with the DNA and activates the specific gene that directs specific proteins to be synthesized. And then that could be an enzyme or anything else. So it can basically turn on chemical reactions by making enzymes, etc. So the steroid hormone goes directly through the cell membrane and targets at the nucleus. The nonsteroidal ones get to the cell membrane where they interact with receptors on the surface, and then the receptors on the surface trigger something to happen within the cell, and we call this the second messenger system. So it's like this. Now, the advantage to this is then the hormone can move on to the next cell, where it can't in the steroidal ones. However, the steroidal ones will be much longer lasting because they don't wash away. I'm not worried about prostaglandins. They are made from fatty acids. They act locally. They can relax smooth muscle. And other things like that. They are another class. But okay, most hormone release is under negative feedback. So the release of the hormone stops further release. We're going to see that there's a chain of events. There are hormones in the hypothalamus, and they control hormone release of the pituitary gland. The anterior pituitary gland hormones target other endocrine glands, which then release their hormones. So, for instance, thyrotropin releasing hormone in the hypothalamus causes the pituitary to secrete thyroid stimulating hormone, which stimulates the thyroid to release the thyroid hormones. The amount of thyroid hormone inhibits the release of the thyrotropin releasing hormone in the hypothalamus and thyroid stimulating hormone in the pituitary gland, so it's a negative feedback. So hypothalamus, pituitary, peripheral, feeds back. The peripheral one goes to the target cells and causes the action. So this would be glandular or endocrine control. We can also have nervous system control with a negative feedback where we need something to happen. The brain tells the endocrine gland to release a hormone, which releases to the target cell, which causes an action, and then the action inhibits the nervous system. It can also be changes of the substance in the plasma. Causes endocrine glands to release, target cells to have an action, which goes back. So this would be something like levels of calcium in the blood cause the parathyroid gland to release parathyroid hormone, which targets osteoclasts to eat bone and release calcium, and then that increased calcium level inhibits the release of more parathyroid hormone. Again, negative feedback. 3 methods: glandular, nervous, and the substance in the plasma. All of them negative feedback. So that's, you understand negative feedback. And average concentrations stay about the same. Okay, so we're going to talk about individual glands. I'm going to start with the pituitary gland because it's the master endocrine gland. It's the one that controls almost everything else in the endocrine system. The pituitary gland is also called the hypophysis, which means below the physis, which is the part of the midbrain. It's a stalk hanging down the infundibulum, and there's 2 lobes: an anterior lobe, which is glandular epithelial tissue. It's often called the adenohypophysis. The posterior lobe is actually neural tissue, and it's called the neural hypophysis. It sits down in the skull in something called the sella turcica. It's connected to the hypothalamus by the infundibulum, and it releases hormones into the bloodstream. So the anterior pituitary gland, all of its hormone release is controlled by the hypothalamus through releasing and inhibiting hormones. And the hormones pass through little blood vessels called the portal veins, and so they're released by the hypothalamus, and the only targets are the anterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary, on the other hand, it really stores hormones made by the hypothalamus and is released because of nerve impulses. So this is just a picture of that. So we'll look at the anterior pituitary hormones. Now, most of the hormones are trophic hormones. Trophic hormones, or trophic, both names are correct, target other endocrine glands, so the word trophic means causes a change in secretion. So the first one that matters is growth hormone, and growth hormone stimulates body cells to grow, reproduce, have mitosis. So it controls the rate at which we use carbohydrates and fat. It is responsible for repair of tissue, not just growth when you're a child. It's controlled by growth hormone releasing hormone and growth hormone inhibiting hormone, both from the hypothalamus, and so it can be controlled very closely. It seems to be released during sleep, which is one of the restorative aspects of sleep. If there's imbalances, you can get dwarfism or gigantism, acromegaly, etc. But that's for a pathology course. Another anterior pituitary hormone is prolactin, prolactation, for milk. So it controls milk production. It's controlled by prolactin releasing hormone and prolactin inhibiting hormone from the hypothalamus. Breastfeeding causes the release of prolactin releasing hormone, which causes the release of prolactin, which then causes more milk production, etc. You stop breastfeeding and inhibiting hormone takes over and the milk dries up. Thyroid stimulating hormone will stimulate the thyroid. It's TSH, thyrotropin, because it's a tropic hormone. It controls the secretion of the thyroid gland. It's controlled by thyrotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. So if blood concentrations of high thyroid hormone increase, then that feeds back and stops the secretion of releasing hormone and stimulating hormone from the hypothalamus and pituitary, whichever one. So TSH stimulates the secretion of thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone is released, which stimulates the target cells to increase their metabolic rate. Thyroid hormones inhibit releasing hormone and stimulating hormone. The releasing hormone causes the anterior pituitary to release stimulating hormone, which then causes, so it's a feedback that way. Another hormone is adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. So this is going to control what the adrenal cortex releases. And it's regulated by corticotropin releasing hormone. Corticotropin affects the cortex. This is involved with stress. So Stress increases the release of corticotropin-releasing hormone, which causes the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone, which causes the adrenal gland to release cortisol, which raises blood sugar by promoting gluconeogenesis in the liver. It increases blood pressure by affecting the kidneys, etc., etc. The gonadotropins are FSH and LH, follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Follicle-stimulating hormone affects the production of gametes in both men and women. It's called follicle-stimulating hormone because it stimulates the follicles of the ovary and causes the maturation of oocytes, egg cells. It causes the testicles to undergo spermatogenesis to make sperm cells. Luteinizing hormone is mostly involved with the sex hormones. In men, LH affects the testicles to make testosterone, and in women, luteinizing hormone causes the corpus luteum, which will release progesterone and estrogen. Together, these two are called the gonadotropins because they affect the gonads. In the posterior pituitary, there's only two hormones, antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Antidiuretic hormone, so these are made in the hypothalamus and they're released from the posterior pituitary, the neural hypophysis. Antidiuretic hormone makes you not pee. Anti against, dia to pass, uretic, urine. So it makes you not pee. It makes you conserve water. So if the amount of water in you is regulated by the hypothalamus, and it regulates the secretion of antidiuretic hormone by looking at the osmolality of the body fluids. So antidiuretic hormone makes you not pee. If you drink alcohol, it inhibits antidiuretic hormone. So you don't go for a pee once a beer because beer makes you pee. Beer makes you not pee because it makes you not have antidiuretic hormone. Oxytocin is really the happy hormone. It plays a role in childbirth, contracts the uterus. It's about milk and lactation, but it also causes bonding and feelings of affection. It happens whenever, it's released whenever skin is stimulated, so you get a certain amount from a massage. It's especially released if the skin of your buttocks, your breasts, or your genitals is stimulated. It's an important hormone for orgasm, and it's the reason that you tend to like the people that stimulate your genitals and butt and breasts. It's a bonding experience. As a baby breastfeeds, the mother bonds with the baby because of that, and her uterus will contract, rehabilitating it. It's like doing exercises for the uterus that's been stretched during pregnancy. So this is just a list of all the hormones in the pituitary gland. Anterior lobe with growth hormone, prolactin, thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocortical hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. Posterior lobe, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin. Important to at least know the list and what they do. So the thyroid gland is very important. It has kind of two groups of hormones. It's found in the front of the throat. So the two thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, regulate caloric intake and the metabolism of all the cells in your body. Calcitonin regulates blood calcium level and bone growth. Calcitonin puts calcium into your bones. It's shaped like a butterfly in the front of your neck. It fills with this stuff called a colloid, which is the inactive form of the hormone. We'll get into it. It needs to bind with iodine to become active. T3 bonds to 3 iodine, T4 to 4 iodine. They increase the rate in which cells make ATP, use carbohydrates, make fats, make proteins, etc. So it's really the metabolic rate. Calcitonin puts calcium into bones. It lowers blood calcium levels. It also makes you pee out more calcium. Puts more in the urine. We don't care about the disorders. This is a chart just listing it. There are 4 little glands really attached to the thyroid on the posterior side of the thyroid. They're called the parathyroid glands. And the hormone they make is parathyroid hormone. Now, parathyroid hormone causes osteoclasts to eat bone and shed calcium. So it's stimulated by low blood calcium levels. So when low blood calcium levels cause the release of parathyroid hormone, they target osteoclasts, which then eat the bone, digest the osteoid, and release the calcium into the blood, so therefore raising calcium. Parathyroid hormone also causes you to conserve calcium. It does the opposite of calcitonin in the kidneys, and it causes the activation of vitamin D, so you increase calcium absorption from your food. All 3 of those things increase blood calcium levels. So parathyroid, increased blood calcium, stimulated by low calcium levels. And it's just found right there, 4 little glands. Just a chart. The adrenal glands sit on top of the kidneys, adrenal, on kidneys. There's an adrenal medulla and an adrenal cortex. So the medulla is in the middle, the cortex is on the outside. The adrenal medulla we already talked about in the sympathetic nervous system, and it releases epinephrine, norepinephrine, the catecholamines, and is involved with sympathetic nervous system. The adrenal cortex has 3 different layers with 3 groups of hormones. Please don't memorize the names, the glomerulosa, fasciculata, and reticularis. Don't bother. Just know that there are 3 groups and 3 different groups of hormones. So this is epinephrine, norepinephrine is the medulla. The cortex are the corticosteroids. Now there's over 30 of them, but they're all grouped into one of 3 things. So there are the mineral corticoids, aldosterone being the most important one. And what they do is they control the electrolyte balances. So aldosterone causes sodium-potassium pumps to turn on in the kidneys, so you reabsorb more calcium, or more sodium, or get rid of potassium So potassium levels are high, aldosterone helps you get rid of it. If sodium levels are low, aldosterone helps you get more. That's going to change osmosis, which will change blood pressure. So blood pressure is a key to aldosterone release. So aldosterone is part of regulating blood pressure as well as the electrolyte balances. The stress hormones, the glucocorticoids that affect glucose, the most important one is cortisol, and it regulates glucose metabolism. So it inhibits protein synthesis so that you have more amino acids that you can oxidize to make ATP. You metabolize fats and proteins differently. It causes the fatty acid release from your adipose tissue. It causes the liver cells to make glucose from non-glucose things, mostly proteins. So this is gluconeogenesis. Stress, disease, release cortisol and raise blood sugar so that you can fight the stress better. And this is the chart for how that works. It is controlled by adrenocorticotropic hormone, which is controlled by the hypothalamus, which is controlled by stress, higher brain centers. So you're stressed, causes the hypothalamus to release corticotropin-releasing hormone, which causes adrenocorticotropic hormone to stimulate the adrenal gland to make cortisol, which then inhibits protein synthesis, fatty acid release, glucose formation, gluconeogenesis, and then the cortisol inhibits the releasing hormone and adrenocorticotropic hormone itself, so it's a negative feedback. The adrenal glands also produce sex hormones. So this is really androgens, adrenal androgens. It's virtually testosterone. It's the only source of testosterone in women. It is inadequate, or it is an insignificant contributor in men to testosterone. It's what gives libido, it causes puberty, it causes growth, and especially of the secondary sexual characteristics, etc. And there's various disorders, but we don't really care. So aldosterone is a mineral corticoid, cortisol glucocorticoid, and the androgens, which are supplemental sex hormones. The pancreas is an interesting organ. Most of it is exocrine. It is digestive enzymes. But there is an endocrine part of it. There are alpha cells and beta cells. So alpha cells secrete something called glucagon, and beta cells release insulin. And as an endocrine thing. And these two things control the level of blood glucose. So if blood glucose levels drop, then glucagon is released and it raises glucose levels. If glucose levels are high, then insulin is released and it lowers glucose. There's an islet cell that has the alpha and beta cells in it. The rest of them are exocrine cells. So glucagon raises blood glucose levels by breaking glycogen down in the liver and making gluconeogenesis. It's controlled by negative feedback. The blood glucose levels directly stimulate the secretion of glucagon. Insulin decreases blood glucose by making it go into cells, increasing protein synthesis, and it stimulates lipogenesis, making adipose cells store fat. Again, it's a negative feedback system. You can follow along with that. Diabetes is obviously a problem with that. Other endocrine organs include things like the pineal gland, which is in one of the ventricles of the brain. It hangs like a pine cone. It secretes melatonin, which is important for sleep cycles and regulation of circadian rhythm. Released at night, suppressed during the day. A little bit of it builds up and releases usually around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is why you get tired about that time. The thymus is behind the sternum, and it's involved with the immune system and endocrine control of the immune system. The ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. The testes produce testosterone. The placenta produces estrogen, progesterone, and gonadotropins, FSH and LH. So they are huge. The reproductive organs are hugely important with those sex hormones. The digestive tract has got hormones that regulate other parts of the digestive tract, the enteroendocrine cells. The heart secretes an important one called atrial natriuretic peptide. Atrial, so it's the atrium of the heart. Na is sodium. Uretic is urine. Peptide is a protein. So it's a protein made by the atrium of the heart that makes your pee salty. So it affects sodium and therefore water excretion by the kidneys. So it lowers your blood pressure. It's stimulated by increased blood pressure. It lowers blood pressure. Negative feedback. Kidneys produce erythropoietin that make red blood cells, produce in the bone marrow, and it also produces renin, which is important in blood pressure, renin-angiotensin. Almost everything has some endocrine function, but this is the list. We're not going to talk about stress, physical stress, or any of that, so we're going to end this video here.